For the three-time Formula One champion Ayrton Senna, who died in a 200-mile-an-hour crash at the San Marino Grand Prix. The sport's governing body has launched a detailed investigation to find out how and why he crashed. Senna's Williams-Renault team arrived back in Britain today, too upset to talk about the tragedy.
The normally bustling gates of Williams Grand Prix engineering are laden with flowers, left by grieving fans who've come to pay their respects to the dead champion. Many find it hard to come to terms with his death. Ayrton Senna crashed at 165 miles an hour during the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola.
Had to come somewhere, had to do something. So, spent so many hours watching him on the telly and admiring him. He's the best. So I had to come and do something.
You can't replace somebody like Senna. There might be people in the future to equal him, but Senna was such a perfectionist that the sport will sadly miss him, and I don't think we should try and replace him. I think we should just leave it at that.
Some of his teammates flew home into Gatwick immediately after the crash, which happened as a 34-year-old Brazilian was leading on the 7th lap. His car crashed into a concrete barrier. The three-times world champion of Formula One racing was known to be unhappy about rule changes.
Obviously, for so many things to happen at one event, it obviously does cause grave concerns, and I think we've just got to take a logical look from here and try and draw some messages from it. I think what has happened is that we've lost a great champion. I think Formula One generally has lost a great champion. And I think all of us here at Williams, and the many millions of people around the world that follow this team, and of course Ayrton Senna, it's going to take a great deal of time to come to terms with what's happened.
Williams say he will be irreplaceable.
Ayrton will never be replaced, as Roland Ratzenberger will never be replaced. But you have to carry on their work, and we just hope that whoever joins the team will do that, and I know that everybody in Formula One will.
In Brazil, there will be 3 days of national mourning. People have wept openly over the loss of their national hero, a man admired by millions around the world. The floral tributes here bear witness to the bravery and dedication that made Ayrton Senna a champion. As the motor racing world comes to terms with its loss, the investigation has begun into the cause of the crash. Hey Oliver, Sky News.
Detectives at Woking.
With the Monaco Grand Prix a fortnight away, Formula One doesn't have long to make racing safer for all. John Desborough, Sky News.
New Zealand's local
300 kilometers an hour. The 34-year-old Senna had expressed concerns about the handling of the car. The crash is raising questions, too, about how racing might be made safer. Peter Staunton reports.
They gathered here from first light, motor racing fans from this car-obsessed region, united in their grief for a triple world champion. And across the track, the point where Ayrton Senna's car hit the concrete wall at close to its maximum speed, marked now by a shrine of flowers. At the circuit headquarters, no outward signs of mourning, no flags at half-mast. Had it been an Italian driver or a Ferrari, things might have been different. And no sign yet of the promised inquiry. Formula One's bosses have moved back to their offices in Paris and London. Track safety, though, will be top of the list. Imola has tried hard to keep up with the massive cornering speeds of recent years, but tragically this weekend, it was not enough.
The main question to be answered here is why, on one of the fastest bends in Grand Prix racing, there is no driver protection at all if something goes wrong. There are no gravel traps to slow the car down, and there is no tyre wall to cushion the impact. And above all, why is there a concrete wall here at all? Peter Staunton, ITN, Imola.
In international...
As he led in the 7th lap of the San Marino Grand Prix. Team boss Frank Williams flew back from Italy and drove straight to the plant. Too shocked to speak about Senna's death.
He would prefer if we just made a statement and went about his business for this afternoon and then went home for some peace and quiet.
Has he been speaking to the family over there?
Yes, he was with Ayrton's brother, and he was at the hospital last evening. He left Bologna reasonably early this morning, had some business to attend to, and is now back here to take stock of the situation, to see where we go.
The death of the 34-year-old Brazilian has touched the millions who supported him as he drove to the top.
He died on my daughter's birthday yesterday, and it's just tragic.
so sad. The great man's gone. It's overwhelming to see what happened to him. I mean, you never think it would happen to one of the best, because in my opinion, he is the best. And he always will be.
Senna was the second Formula One driver to be killed at Imola within 24 hours. The Austrian Roland Ratzenberger died after crashing during a qualifying round on Saturday. The deaths coincide with changes to Formula One, intended to restrict the use of computer technology.
People tend to forget is that the computerized aids really only came in last year. In the whole of the 12 years we've had without anyone getting killed, they didn't have any computerized aids. They have really nothing to do with it. It's just people looking around, what's the most recent thing that's changed.
In Brazil, there will be 3 days of national mourning. People have wept openly over the loss of their national hero. Ayrton Senna was one of the leading voices in the crusade for improved safety standards in Formula One racing. The irony is his death may now lead to the review he wanted. Kay Oliver, Sky News.
Well, the British Grand Prix racing driver Martin Donnelly stopped racing after he had an horrific crash. Now his wife has told Sky News that she's relieved that she doesn't have to stand and wait anymore. But Diane Donnelly has rejected calls for the sport to be banned.
These days, Diane Donnelly hasn't the worry of whether her husband will survive Formula One racing. But she knows more than most what that's like. Her husband Martin was seriously injured in a Formula One crash in the 1990 Spanish Grand Prix. His injuries were so bad, he had to give up racing.
To stand in the garage again and wait and wonder when that red light comes on and you think, right, just please come round. I don't have to do that anymore, and I am relieved.
Diane and Martin Donnelly knew Ayrton Senna extremely well, both on and off the track. She says yesterday's tragedy brought back the shock of 4 years ago.
You always think that you're going to forget and that time will heal, but yesterday just brought everything back to me again and exactly how I felt. It was a terrible time, and yesterday I was glad that my husband isn't racing any longer, because I don't think I could go through worrying if it was ever going to happen to him again. That's the hard part.
But like many racing wives, she knows the sport will continue and doesn't think it should be banned.
And I think everyone knows with the speeds involved in motorsport, there's always that element of danger. But if you consider the motor racing that goes on all over the world, there's very, very few serious accidents.
Today's an open day at Martin Donnelly's headquarters. Thousands have turned up. Motor racing in mourning goes on. Tim Needham, Sky News.
And we'll have more on the death of Ayrton Senna, including our interview with Niki Lauda later on in this hour.
And the Automobile Federation has called an emergency meeting in Paris on Wednesday to discuss safety in the sport. The former world champion Alain Prost has already said he wants immediate action after the tragic deaths of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger.
Prost's reaction to events at the weekend was long coming. Everything in motor racing was done for business, for money, he said, and not for the sport. His calls for change are finding sympathy.
And things like this, they shouldn't happen without taking the experience from it.
Watching two friends die and a third avoid death by inches had plunged the sport into shock. Drivers may now unite to push for new safety measures. Many in the sport have looked at the absence of the driver aids as the reason for the weekend's events. Ayrton Senna himself predicted their removal would cause more accidents, but they are wrong.
This terrible weekend immediately after a change of regulations, but in fact those 3 accidents were not caused by the change in regulations.
In 1976, former champion Niki Lauda walked away from an almost fatal crash.
On the long run, I think we have to look into the cars, because the cars being made out of carbon fiber, they're very strong, so any impact you have today, you can save your legs, nothing happens to you anymore. The only problem is that now the neck and the helmet of the drivers are still completely unprotected. And I think in this area, the designers have to do something.
Martin Donnelly, a victim of a spill at the Spanish Grand Prix in 1990 that left him in a coma, suggests a way forward.
I would like to see the drivers move physically back further in the car, the front wheelbase move further forward, so the drivers have more room, more structural, where the cars have an impact, more structural force there for them to get out of, and also the cockpit openings to be bigger.
Formula One drivers already have a number of statutory safety measures. Overalls and gloves for their protection, extinguishers, roll bars and self-sealing fuel lines. But little could have helped either Senna or Ratzenberger, who crashed at high speed into concrete walls. The sport will now think again about the design of its circuits. In a fortnight, it's the Monaco Grand Prix, a street circuit, and perhaps the most dangerous track of them all for high-speed racing. John Desborough, Sky News.
Cricket now, and Surrey are making...
Ayrton Senna on Sunday. Senna, one of the best that Formula One has ever produced. Gone now, gone, and now they discuss what should have been done. Now they talk of closing the barn door. Surely they are the first deaths in Formula One in 13 years, but they are two gone, two very bright lights. And where was the foresight to keep them shining? In London, barn doorists are feverishly...
Ayrton Senna, another former champion, Nicky Lauda, said on Sky News it's time to improve Grand Prix safety.
The channel is, and I do stress this is just speculation at this stage, is that Ayrton Senna might have run over a small piece of debris from the earlier accident which happened on the start line, and that might have been enough to puncture that front right-hand tyre just at precisely the wrong moment when the car was going at its fastest.
As you will know, many people are blaming the accident on the banning this season of certain driver aids. What do you make of that?
I'm sure that's not the case. The rules have changed to put more emphasis on the driver's skill and to remove some of the clever electronic aids which allow the car to do a lot of the driver's work. But both of the accidents to Roland Ratzenberger on Saturday and to Ayrton Senna yesterday were accidents which seem to be due to some sort of mechanical failure, quite unconnected with the change of the rules. I don't believe that the new rules had anything at all to do with it.
Lauda's made this point about he would like cars to be redesigned to protect a driver's head better. Since both Ratzenberger and Senna died of head injuries, it does seem a good point, doesn't it?
That's a very good point. I think one has to accept that racing cars have become immeasurably safer and stronger, with more sophisticated construction and improved regulations over the last decade, which is why these are the first fatalities we've had in Grand Prix racing for 12 years. The driver's head and the driver's neck remain the most vulnerable parts. The rest of his body is extremely well protected, and in fact, in Senna's accident, the actual central monocoque of the car that he is strapped into remained pretty much intact. It was the head and neck injuries, I gather, that killed him. So yes, if there is any way in which some sort of neck support can be designed, some way of protecting the driver's head actually in the cockpit, then it certainly should be investigated.
The Automobile Federation meets in Paris on Wednesday. What do you expect to come out of that, especially looking forward to the Monaco Grand Prix?
Well, I think the thing that the FIA will be particularly looking at is the design of the circuits. Those two have become safer, but both accidents at Imola involved a car hitting a concrete wall at very, very high speeds. The next race on Sunday week is at Monte Carlo, a temporary circuit which is erected each year with the help of concrete barriers and steel barriers that are put out around the streets of Monte Carlo. The speeds there are lower, but still the cars are doing up to 170 miles an hour through the tunnel in Monte Carlo, and that's really got to be the concern. I think that what the FIA will be looking at in particular is, are there additional types of retaining wall, of barrier, things that will perhaps slow the cars down more progressively, rather than the instantaneous and terrifying forces that go through a car when you're hitting an immovable concrete wall at 170, 180 miles an hour.
Simon Taylor from Autosport, thank you very much.
And if you've just joined us, let me tell you that...
And the scenes at Imola yesterday as the news broke of Senna's death. Reigning world champion Alain Prost, who's now retired, said some people will say such accidents are part of the sport, but he wonders whether the problem is not due to a succession of rule changes. The Williams team pit after the accident. Frenchman Jacques Lafitte, who was himself forced to retire after an injury, said it was a terrible loss for motorsport. He said we're at the point of no return. Cars are travelling too fast, and if the crowds enjoyed the racing 20 years ago, then why did we ever need to drive faster? They could easily now cut 20 seconds off each lap during racing. Lafitte said the cockpits are so solid these days that a body can simply not resist the shock.
c'est la tête du pilote qui prend tous les chocs à chaque fois.
For me, it was already the most difficult thing after yesterday. Okay, now it's again a good friend of mine, but once you're in the car, once you close your eyes here, you have to concentrate on other things. That's not the point.
The only thing I can say about this is I hope we learn from this. I think there is a lot to learn from, and we have to use this. And things like this, they shouldn't happen without taking the experience from it. It's the only thing I want to say and I can say.
The Formula One authorities have been the target of criticism for the weekend's events at Imola, many people believing the commercial interests of Fokker president Bernie Ecclestone and FIA boss Max Mosley have been allowed to take prominence over security matters. As sponsors' money and television rights have come to rule the roost in Formula One, the drivers themselves have become merely showmen in a multi-million-dollar circus. Formula One racing has come a long way since its early days, and perhaps it has now reached the limits of safety, notably since rule changes at the end of last season made the cars more difficult to handle. Senna himself had made the remark at the start of the 1994 season. And yet, as the cars have got quicker, so the equipment and technical support has improved. Drivers forced to wear full-face helmets as racing speeds reached incredible heights. The chassis have also had to improve, gradually improving driver protection, or rather attempting to improve. As history has shown, Formula One is a deadly sport, as Lorenzo Bandini found out in 1967 in Monaco. But the world really awoke to the dangers in 1982 when Canadian Gilles Villeneuve was killed during the Belgian Grand Prix. Villeneuve, perhaps the first major star of the sport to die since Jim Clark earlier in the Formula One history. Since then, crash tests have been introduced on all Formula One single-seaters, and researchers are constantly working on ways of making the sport safe. But the push for progress and no doubt the pressures of the commercial world would seem to be the enemies of safety. This weekend at Imola was proof enough.